Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast. We are live on the POSTCAST following the Timberwolves loss to the Chicago Bulls. Marney Gellner from Bally Sports North joins the show to break down the game. The Locked On Wolves POSTCAST starts right now.
You are Locked On Wolves POSTCAST, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm joined by Marney Gellner from Bally Sports North. We're going to talk about the Wolves' loss to the Bulls on Friday night. And Marney, this was a tough one in a lot of ways. Anthony Edwards sprains his ankle early in the game in the first quarter. Timberwolves managed to hold a lead for much of the game on the road against the Bulls, and then ultimately they lose in double overtime.
Yeah, we probably have to take those topics separately because the sprained ankle is obviously significant. We don't know the extent of it. We don't know if it's your standard garden variety sprained ankle, if it's a high sprained ankle, but losing that man is not good right now. And the Wolves, of course, play tomorrow night, and then they play on Monday night. It's 3 games in 4 days. And I would be shocked if Anthony Edwards plays in any of those, at least on this trip. So that is bullet point number one. That is concern number one. Concern for me outside of that in this game, my biggest frustration was that the Wolves had a chance to win the game in regulation, and they had a chance to win the game in the first overtime. And in neither case, when there was plenty of time, in neither case did they get off any kind of a respectable shot. I thought. I get Jaden McDaniels got kind of a contested 2, but he had Vucevic just flailing on his left side, and I thought he could have driven right. And neither time did they either make attempt to go to the basket. It was so frustrating because that was it. That was your opportunity to win the game, and you got it twice and couldn't take advantage of it. So that was my biggest frustration in this one, was those 2 particular possessions.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to set up, the end of regulation, the Wolves they were up by 2 with under a minute to play. Patrick Beverley travels on the Bulls offensive possession. Gobert gets fouled with the Wolves up by 2. This at the end of regulation. He misses both free throws, and then the Bulls get the 8-second violation. They don't get across the timeline in 8 seconds, so the Wolves have the ball again up 2. This is after the Gobert missed free throws, so if he makes those, they're up 4. He misses them. They're still up 2. Now they've got the ball with 46 seconds left, and Conley ended up taking a really tough three-pointer. They used the whole shot clock, as they should have, but didn't get off a good shot. And then DeMar DeRozan beat Kyle Anderson off the dribble pretty easily to tie the game, and then that's when Kyle Anderson, after the timeout, double dribbled. The Wolves were unable to get a shot off, like you alluded to, entirely at the end of regulation. That was the first issue. Then at the end of the first overtime, you mentioned the McDaniels shot. I mean, that was after Conley hit a 3. Gobert fouls out on a tough call. McDaniels hits a big shot with about 42 seconds left in the first overtime. Naz gets the block on Zach LaVine. The Wolves have the ball coming back the other way with 20 seconds left, essentially playing keep away. I think there was a little bit of a differential, so not much. So I think the Bulls were probably trying to get a steal and not foul. Sure enough, Taurean Prince throws the ball away. The Bulls get it going back the other way and get a layup in transition. So, yeah, I mean, the Wolves not only had the ball with a chance to win in a tie game at the end of both regulation and the first overtime, but they had a lead with a chance to extend it with about 30 seconds to play in both situations and kind of kicked it away in both instances.
And you don't often get 2 opportunities like that with a full 20 seconds left on the clock. And I think the overtime was 13 seconds, like out of a timeout. Everything is calm. We've had a chance to regroup. Here's what we're doing. We have the ball at half court. Like, we've advanced the basketball, and it's tied. It's not like if you miss the shot, you lose. You are in the driver's seat in those situations. And I was just frustrated that nobody even went into the paint. Just try to get someone to foul you, get to the free throw line, make 1, and you win the game, essentially, depending on how much time is left on the clock. But the Wolves just couldn't do it, and that is where if Anthony Edwards is on the court, it's a totally different story. But he wasn't, and so this is where we are now.
Yeah, in terms of like who played well, and I want to get back to the Ant thing, I guess, here in a minute. But in terms of who played well in his absence, we have to talk about Jaden McDaniels. I mean, he was relatively quiet early in the game, but solid, and I thought pretty good defensively as he usually is. But down the stretch, he hit some big shots. He had a couple of big threes late in regulation when the game was very close, kind of back and forth, and the Wolves were trying to keep pace with the Bulls. And then he had that big floater in overtime as well. He finished with 25 points on 7 of 15 shooting, made 4 threes in this game, got to the line 8 times, which is a lot for Jaden McDaniels. 6 rebounds, 4 assists, only 1 turnover for Jaden. He played, as 3 Wolves players that played 45 or more minutes. McDaniels played 45. For him to also not be in foul trouble was impressive too, given the caliber of players he was guarding and the way that he plays. But a really good Jaden McDaniels game overall. And like the 10,000-foot view here is like, no Karl Anthony Towns, no Anthony Edwards, obviously no D'Angelo Russell. Like, weirdly, you start the year with, who's going to score? And then Gobert fouls out, right? So you get into the second overtime, who scores? And the Wolves were relying on Kyle Anderson essentially in isolation at the end of regulation to try and get a basket. And that's kind of where they were at. And then it was kind of up to Jaden McDaniels. He ends up tying for the team lead in field goal attempts in this game because they didn't really have anywhere else to turn. And I thought in general, McDaniels played really well in this one.
I agree with that. And I thought it was just a good sign to see his aggressiveness and his willingness to take on the offensive role, because sometimes he hangs his hat on his defense, and if his offense comes along, it's kind of a bonus. So when he steps forward in the more aggressive offensive role when it was needed, I just thought that was very conscious on Jaden's part, and really good to see that he has that capability to hopefully be able to fill his portion however long Ant is out. But Jaden had 25 tonight. That's a career high. His previous career high was 24. So he nipped it by 1 in a double overtime game when, the team really needed him, and he was there. So there's hopefully somebody we can count on for some offense for however long Edwards is going to miss.
Yeah. He's like, the Wolves are going to give him the ball more frequently. He's going to have plenty more opportunities. Mike Conley, we should also talk about his play, especially early in this game. He was huge. He finished with 28. He was stuck on 20 for a little while, but he made 8 threes in this game. 12 of his 14 shot attempts were threes, 8 of 12 outside the arc, 6 assists to only 1 turnover for Mike Conley, 5 rebounds, 3 steals, 46 minutes. I didn't look this up, but I'd be willing to bet he hasn't played 40 plus minutes in a really long time. But just a really steady hand. It was almost like Memphis Mike Conley in terms of how frequently he was, getting the opportunity to shoot the ball. Not like they were running things for Mike Conley, but because the Bulls were overloading on everybody else, Conley kept getting open threes. They were leaving him open, and he's a really good catch and shoot 3-point shooter. But an important game from Conley when the Wolves needed him most, and probably his most well-rounded or I guess best offensive game, certainly in a Timberwolves uniform.
Yeah, a career high in threes. He's never hit 8 before. He's hit 7 a handful of times. So he had tied his 3-point career record, and he was kind of sitting on it for a while, and then boom, came number 8. But I felt like it wasn't forceful at all. We kind of showed a montage of highlights of Mike Conley hitting threes, and they were very fluid. They were very wherever Chicago isn't, Mike Conley was. So, that's pretty much the definition of taking what the defense gives you. And that's what Conley was doing. And he just happened to be in that groove. So he kept firing. It was really, really good to see. And I just love watching this man because he absolutely fascinates me with his left-handed 3-point shot. Yet when he can get into the lane and get a floater, he shoots it with his right hand. And I just think that is such a weapon. And it's mind-boggling for those of us who can't do both. And I just think he really had a nice game, and his presence and his control and all of that was just spot on, and the shot making was, especially from 3, just really good tonight.
Another Timberwolves player who had a good game, I thought, was Kyle Anderson had a triple double. He was asked to do a lot towards the end of the game, and was I don't know. He's been kind of a straw that stirs the drink for the Wolves for a long time now, but they needed him to score, and he shot just 4 of 14, but he still finished with the triple-double, 11 points, 10 rebounds, 12 assists. And then on the flip side, we saw some struggles from the Wolves bench. I mean, Naz Reid had a really rough first half. He had a good stint in the second half where he had a few good plays in a row. And then after Gobert got or fouled out, I should say, in overtime, Naz had a layup rim in and out that was like 3/4 of the way down. That was with 1.5 minutes left in the second overtime, and it would have tied the game. That was as close as the Wolves got down the stretch in that game. And quickly the Bulls went up 5, which was their biggest lead in the game to that point, near the end of that second overtime. So Naz had a rough stretch there, some bad luck, a couple of rough possessions, and especially early in the game, I felt like he was a bit out of sorts. The bench as a whole for the Wolves shot only 15 of 39 in this game, which is 38.5%. And in a game when Anthony Edwards played only 8 minutes, went out with the injury in the first quarter, the Wolves needed their bench to show up. And, there were some good moments. Nickeil Alexander-Walker had a couple good stints. Jordan McLaughlin played well in general. But for the most part, the efficiency was not there for the bench, shooting under 39%.
Yeah, and Taurean Prince was part of that. He ended up starting the second half for Anthony Edwards, but he made that really tough pass that turned the ball over in the first overtime, if I'm remembering it correctly. TP just has not looked like himself in the last handful of games. He missed a couple of games for personal reasons, and then he just hasn't quite had the same effectiveness since he came back. Hopefully that'll click in pretty quickly because he might be the guy in the starting lineup. But you're right, on a night when the Wolves just needed more from their bench because not only their starter, but their leading scorer missed most of the game. Yeah, it just wasn't there. And you mentioned that one shot from Naz, that layup that looked like it was at least halfway down the net and it rattled out. I don't know physically how that thing did not go through. That was one of those, you had to hold your head in your hands. But the Wolves in overtime went 1 of 3 in the paint, and in the second overtime went 1 for 4 in the paint. So I feel like we saw that shot or that type of shot multiple times in the most important moments. Like it wouldn't go down for them, and Naz probably had the most memorable of those.
Yeah, and the Wolves, I mean, they lost the paint battle. Certainly the overtimes were a big factor in that, right? I mean, I think it was probably pretty close heading out of regulation, but they were a -10 in the paint against the Bulls. The Wolves are a +3 on the glass. They competed there, but it's not like the Bulls are world beaters on the glass necessarily. But free throws, again, I talked about this on the show the other day. The Wolves, it's been like since early February, and this was a few days ago, but I think it's still current. Like since early February was the last time the Wolves shot better than 75% from the line in a game. And for the season, they're like 17th or 18th in the league. So they haven't been atrocious, but lately it's been an issue. And this was another game. I mean, you talk about a double overtime game. Yeah, they ended up losing by 8, but it went to 2 overtimes. And the Wolves missed 10 free throws in this one. The Bulls only missed 4. So the Wolves actually attempted 1 more free throw than Chicago, but they made 5 fewer. They shot 67.7% from the line. The Bulls were 87% in this game. So free throws, turnovers, like 15 is not a great number. It's not horrible for a 2 overtime game, but the timeliness, or I guess lack thereof, of especially that Prince turnover, just a little bit of sloppiness. And of course, not normally the combination of guys you'd have on the floor, right? After Gobert fouls out, Edwards is hurt. You had Nickeil Alexander-Walker playing overtime minutes. You had Taurean Prince on the floor with the starters. It was just kind of a weird lineup at that point in the game. It was like Jaden McDaniels and a bunch of vets with, Alexander-Walker kind of mixed in. So certainly that can be partially to blame, but turnovers, missed free throws, in general, the other night when the Wolves lost to Boston, it was just a lot of missed wide open shots. And then, of course, the adventures down the stretch from the officiating crew. But in this game, I think we can point to missed free throws. We can point to the issues with the turnovers. And then, obviously, what ended up being a pretty thin lineup in overtime.
A lot of those things add up. I mean, you only need like one of those things to go your way to be able to leave there with a win. I know the final margin ended up being 8, but obviously it was tied after regulation. It was tied after the first overtime. So all you need is one of those factors to tilt your way, or go out and grab it. Just make a difference somewhere. I mean, you're talking about free throws, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I felt so bad for him. He airballed the front end of 2 free throw shots and was right in front of the Bulls bench, and they're all clowning him a little bit. And to Nickeil's credit, he knocked down the second one. But to just those little things, and the free throwing has just been such an issue, especially in the month of March. And in these close games, they're just leaving a ton of points. And good teams just don't let that happen. And I really hope that this is not something that the Wolves find to be costly more than it already is. I mean, they dropped from the 7th seed to the 8th seed tonight, and I guess that's not totally unrealistic, but man, those things that just have to be buttoned up. They have to be better if you want any realistic shot of climbing out of the play-in.
Yeah, and currently right now, as we're recording this after the game, Dallas and the Lakers are playing each other. Dallas has an 11-point lead midway through the third quarter on the Lakers. If Dallas wins, they'll stay ahead of the Timberwolves by a full game. Of course, the Wolves, if they catch up to them, have the tiebreaker. The Lakers would stay a full game behind the Wolves. The Wolves also have that tiebreaker. If the Lakers win, then LA and the Wolves would be tied with the Mavericks. It would be a three-way tie, and actually the Wolves would have that tiebreaker. So if I'm doing this math correctly on the fly, the Wolves would actually technically be in the 7th seed by virtue of that tiebreaker. But the Wolves, Mavs, and Lakers would all have the exact same record. And right now, it's like nobody wants to actually, take the bull by the horns and make a run at Golden State in the 6th spot, or even LA, the Clippers, in the 5th spot. But the Wolves also right now are only a game ahead of the Jazz, who are 11th and the first team out of the play-in as it stands in the Western Conference. So now, losing 4 out of 5, we're sitting here talking about like, hey, they've got to at least, like, the play-in's far from a given at this point. And now you look at this Ant injury. We don't know the extent of it, like you said, but it obviously seems extremely unlikely he plays Saturday, and it would be surprising at this point if he plays Monday. The Wolves, this schedule is not easy moving forward, right? I mean, they're at Toronto, which is, the Wolves beat the Raptors earlier this year, but it's a tough matchup. They've got long, athletic defenders. The Wolves don't have the scoring punch, presumably, of Ant. They obviously are down other guys as well. And then at the Knicks, who have been playing extremely well on Monday night as well. So a difficult stretch upcoming, and a really important stretch, as the rest of the games all are at this point for the Wolves.
And when you were talking about the standings there, Ben, I do think that it's important, if you want to see the whole picture and you keep looking up and saying, oh, we're only a game out of 6, we're only a game and a half out of 5th, or whatever it happens to be on that particular day. You're right. That's true. But if you're going to look up, you better also look down, because you're probably that exact same distance away from 10 or 11 or 12, depending on the day. I mean, it is that jam-packed. So you're right. It is not a given that the Wolves are in even 7 to 10. It's not a given. They've got to pick up some wins here along the way. And man, losing a double overtime game really stings even more when you realize that scenario. And who knows where we're headed with the Anthony Edwards injury? Who knows where we're headed with Karl Anthony Towns and his return? Does this change things? Does this move up the timeline at all? Are we going to see him regardless next week, very soon? Don't know. What's it going to be like when he comes back? Also don't know that. It is going to be a wild 11. How about that? We're down to 11 games this season. Let's go.
Wolves in Toronto Saturday night. We will not have the postcast on Saturday, but we'll be back Monday night after the Wolves-Knicks game, after hopefully a good close to the weekend for the Wolves. And again, Monday night after the Knicks game, we'll go live about 45 minutes or so following the game. That's a 6:30 Central tip at the Knicks. And we go live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel, and then you can also listen to the audio after the fact. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can subscribe to Locked On Wolves, and the audio from all the live postcasts is posted there after we go live. A big thank you for watching tonight. A big thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.